These are the Nothing Headphone A. Nothing's more affordable alternative to the Headphone 1, but to get to this lower price point, corners obviously had to be cut. So what were those corners, and what big mistake do I think Nothing made in the process? Let's find out. What's up friends, I'm Brian MacDuff, aka BMac, and welcome to another video. So yes, today we are gonna be taking a look at the Nothing Headphone A more budget-friendly pair of headphones that did have to cut some corners to get to this cheaper price point, but not without a mistake being made in the process. First things first, I do need to give a huge thank you to Nothing for sending out a pair of the Nothing Headphone A for me to be able to check out and review, so Nothing, thank you. But with that having been said, let's get started right away here with the design, because if Nothing had to substantially lower the MSRP compared to the Headphone 1, this is where those compromises should be easiest to spot. With the Headphone A, there are obviously some differences in design, but they're honestly much harder to notice than I expected. When you look at the two headphones side by side, the outer faces of the ear cups are almost like inversions of one another. On the Headphone A, this is where things are basically flipped. The rectangular portion is made from a glossier polycarbonate material and contains the transparent elements, while the raised oval part of the back here is the solid portion, although it too also has a glossy finish. So two very similar designs with differences you'll probably only notice if you inspect them side by side. The Headphone A weighing at 310 grams, slightly lighter than the 329 gram Headphone 1, but I will say that the padding around the ear cushions and in the headband does feel a little less substantial. It's not drastic, and if we're being honest, this has not resulted in any kind of meaningful reduction in comfort for me. When these are on my head and I'm listening to them, things still feel almost identical to how they felt with the Headphone 1. But something that is identical here in the Headphone A to the Headphone 1 is going to be the physical control system. You still have a physical power switch, USB-C and a 3.5mm connection, the Bluetooth pairing button, the roller for volume and playback control, the paddle for moving through your tracks, and the customizable button on the outside of the right ear cup. I still continue to find this system of tactile, intuitive control very easy and pleasant to use. But one other corner that was clearly cut with the Headphone A has to do with their traveling case. Or lack thereof, I should say. For the way I normally carry headphones when I'm traveling, putting them in a pouch and then just tucking them away in my backpack, for example, that's usually sufficient enough. So personally, I'm okay with that compromise here. And while the materials are pretty clearly where Nothing's cost cutting is easiest to see in the design, the bigger concern is with actual features that may have been cut here to keep the price down as well. So now let's talk about connectivity, because this is the category where we find out whether or not Nothing has preserved the features that actually matter, or cut something you might miss every single day. The Headphone A used Bluetooth 5.4 compared to Bluetooth 5.3 on the Headphone 1. Perhaps more importantly, however, both headphones do still support the same three Bluetooth audio codecs, SBC, AAC, and LDAC. Both models also do support audio through a USB-C or a standard 3.5mm connection, and both support dual connection for staying connected to two devices at the same time. You also have low lag mode on both pairs, with Nothing claiming latency below 120 milliseconds when they're connected to a Nothing phone with game mode enabled. If we're being honest, that's still not quite a latency number I'd be comfortable with for serious real-time competitive gaming, but it is at least a lower latency option for those of you who may need it. In the Nothing X app, both headphones include the same basic EQ presets, along with a simpler custom EQ setting and the more powerful 8-band advanced parametric equalizer option. So the core connection and customization options here with the Headphone A remains intact, but that does not mean that every premium feature has survived. The first corner that was cut here in the feature department is going to be wear detection. The Headphone 1 can detect when you remove them and put them back on for automatically pausing and resuming your audio, but the Headphone A do not have that feature. But the second corner that was cut here is going to be personal sound. On the Headphone 1, the Nothing X companion app can perform a hearing analysis to create a personal sound profile based on how you actually hear different frequencies, but that is not available on the Headphone A. And on my current firmware, Bass Enhance is available on both models, although you do only have 2 intensity options on the Headphone A compared to 5 levels on the Headphone 1. So arguably, you get a little bit more bass control on the Headphone 1, but Bass Enhance was not removed entirely from the Headphone A, which leaves spatial audio. Another feature I think Nothing probably could have removed from the Headphone A, and they would be justified in doing so, but that's not what Nothing actually did here. The Headphone 1 offers both fixed spatial audio and dynamic head tracking spatial audio, while the Headphone A here do not have the necessary head tracking sensors. So they still do offer 2 static spatial audio modes within the Nothing X companion app, Concert and Cinema. You're just not getting head tracking. More on those spatial audio sound modes for the Nothing Headphone A's here in just a few minutes. But surprisingly, on my current app and on my current Headphone 1 and Headphone A firmware, you actually have to disable bass enhanced and advanced EQ on the Headphone 1 to use spatial audio, whereas you do not have to turn off either of those features on the Headphone A when using Concert or Cinema mode spatial audio. So even though the Headphone 1 have the more advanced spatial audio system, the Headphone A could actually give you more freedom to combine spatial audio with some of the other sound enhancement features. And for Nothing phone users, both headphone models do also support those additional button shortcut options, including channel hop and ChatGPT voice, with the exact options of course varying by model, phone, region, and software version, but pretty cool to see that there's apparently no meaningful corner cut here with the Headphone A as it relates to that either. The Headphone 1 may have an edge with the wear detection, the personal sound, more bass enhancement control, and a more advanced head track spatial audio system. But the Headphone A, in my opinion, still hold their own by retaining the features that arguably matter the most, but that also does make what happens in the listening test even more important. So now we have to talk about sound quality, because this is where the comparison between these two headphone models starts to become genuinely surprising. The Headphone A use 40mm dynamic drivers, just like the Headphone 1 do, but they do not have the same driver design. The Headphone 1 have a custom nickel-plated diaphragm with a wide, high linearity polyurethane surround, and the overall acoustic system was developed and tuned in collaboration with KEF. The Headphone A, on the other hand, use a titanium-coated diaphragm with a newer magnet and voice coil system designed to increase sensitivity, but when I actually listened to both of these pairs of headphones side by side, I actually prefer the Headphone A. When directly comparing these two headphones using the same sound source, songs, volume, and corresponding sound settings, the Headphone A just sounded punchier, more energetic, and more immediately impactful to my ears. The bass hits with more authority, vocals sound a little less recessed, and the entire presentation just sounds more lively. The Headphone A created what sounded like a wider and more immersive listening experience, whereby music sounded like it had more room to actually spread out, while the Headphone 1 can sound rather narrow and contained in comparison. Someone who prefers a smoother, more controlled, and a more balanced foundation may still prefer the Headphone 1 sound quality, since they can sound a little more refined and a little less aggressively tuned. But if someone's priority is a genuinely neutral or reference style listening experience, neither of these lifestyle-focused wireless headphones would necessarily be my first recommendation for that anyway. I would still not call the Headphone A sound quality perfect. On my preferred EQ preset out of the box, the balance profile, parts of the upper frequencies can sound a little aggressive, and depending on the song, cymbals, effects, and certain vocals can become sharper or more prominent than I'd like them to. But that does become even more important when I compare this problem with the much more serious sound issue that I continue to experience on the Headphone 1. Even after several firmware updates, my Headphone 1 still produced an audible bass distortion on certain bass-heavy tracks at higher volumes when either ANC or transparency mode is enabled. It is song dependent, and it's not every track that is triggering this problem, but when it's there, it really does hurt my overall Headphone 1 listening experience. If you wanna learn more about this issue, definitely be sure to check out my Nothing Headphone 1 review video, because that's where I break it down in more of its entirety, and you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But more importantly here, when I play those same songs at similarly high volumes on the Headphone A, I do not get that same bass distortion, even when I have bass enhanced turned on and maxed out. So the Headphone A can sound punchier, more impactful, and heavier hitting in the bass without producing that distortion that I experienced with the Headphone 1 in my testing. The Headphone A are rated for up to 40 decibels of active noise cancellation compared to 42 decibels on the Headphone 1, but in my experience, the ANC on the Headphone A seems perfectly fine. It does a really solid job of reducing everyday background noise, and I could hardly tell a difference between the two headphones. I also seem to like the spatial audio processing on the Headphone A more. It adds a more convincing sense of space. It's still processed, obviously, but the effect feels more open and better suited to music. It honestly almost feels like the sound profiles have been reversed. I would have expected the Nothing Headphone 1s to deliver the bigger, more exciting, and more confident presentation, while the less expensive headphone A's I expected to receive the narrower and more compromising sound, but instead, we're getting the opposite. If you're wondering about microphone quality, the Headphone A have a total of 5 microphones used for the ANC and call quality. That's one less than the Headphone 1 have, but the Headphone A do still offer environmental noise cancellation and AI clear voice technology. So can you even tell that the Headphone A have one less microphone? I don't think so, but here's a quick little demo to help you decide. This is what the microphone quality of the Nothing Headphone A sounds like in the studio. This is raw audio recorded directly from the Nothing Headphone A into the voice memos app on my iPhone, so hopefully this gives you a pretty good idea of what to expect. This is what the microphone quality of the Nothing Headphone A sounds like with simulated background noise. This is raw audio recorded directly from the Nothing Headphone A into the voice memos app on my iPhone, so hopefully this gives you a pretty good idea of what to expect. This is what the microphone quality of the Nothing Headphone A sounds like with simulated wind. This is raw audio recorded directly from the Nothing Headphone A into the voice memos app on my iPhone, so hopefully this gives you a pretty good idea of what to expect. But another thing here we have to talk about is the battery comparison, because the upside down kind of product hierarchy that we have here makes the differences here even harder to ignore. Starting things out with AAC playback and ANC turned off, Nothing is claiming up to 80 hours of battery life from the Nothing Headphone 1, which is already a very good number. But the Headphone A actually increased that to an almost ridiculous 135 hours. Pretty nuts, but the difference becomes even more substantial when ANC is enabled. The Headphone 1 are rated for up to 35 hours of AAC playback with ANC turned on, while the Headphone A are rated for up to 75 hours. And if you're following along, that means that is more than double the claimed ANC battery life on the cheaper Headphone A. But does that carry over to LDAC also? With LDAC enabled, the Headphone 1 are rated for up to 54 hours with ANC turned off, or up to 30 hours with ANC turned on, while the Headphone A are rated for up to 90 hours with ANC turned off, and up to 62 hours with ANC turned on. Now, of course, these are Nothing's own lab claims measured probably at 50% volume, and your actual results are gonna vary depending on volume, the music you're listening to, the range, the temperature, a bunch of other factors. I have found that I've needed to charge the Headphone A far less often than I've needed to on the Headphone 1. Makes sense because of the better battery life numbers, but speaking of charging, a 5-minute charge provides up to 8 hours of playback with ANC turned off, or 5 hours with ANC turned on the Headphone A, whereby that same 5-minute charge on the Headphone 1 provides up to 5 hours of playback with ANC off, or around 2.4 hours with ANC turned on. In other words, the Headphone A lasts substantially longer on a full charge, and they give you more listening time when you only have a few minutes to plug them in and charge them, despite both these headphones reportedly having pretty much the same overall battery capacity. So that brings us back to our original question. Were corners cut with the Headphone A, and what mistake did Nothing make with these headphones? Yes, the Headphone 1 do still physically feel more premium. They also include a more protective case, they offer wearing detection, personal sound, head track spatial audio, and if those features or their calmer sound profile appeal to you, they do remain arguably the more complete pair of headphones. But I don't think any of those advantages for me personally meaningfully outweigh what I'm getting from the Headphone A at roughly 2/3 of the Headphone 1's MSRP. The Headphone A feel nearly identical once they're on my head. They retain the same excellent controls. They have the same connectivity, LDAC support, and advanced equalization options. They sound punchier, they sound more expansive. They avoid the big bass distortion issue that I'm still experiencing with my Headphone 1, and they last dramatically longer between charges. So were the corners cut? Absolutely. And again, I think they were cut in all of the right places. And I think Nothing's mistake was giving the Nothing Headphone A a substantially lower MSRP, while also making them so compelling that the Headphone 1 become that much harder to justify. Between these two headphones, I never thought I'd say this, but I actually would personally choose the Headphone A, the pair I was not expecting to choose. But now, surprisingly am. And I might go so far as to say that I think the Headphone A probably are going to be the better pair of headphones for most people. For the latest deals, prices, promos, and information for the Nothing Headphone A headphones, you can of course always head to my affiliate link, bmac.link/headphone-A, or of course, as always, there will be clickable links in the video description box and in the comment section below, so check those out. But with that having been said, it is time for me to go relax. While listening to these babies, I'm just gonna go kick up my legs, let this video export, enjoy the sound from these because why not? I will see you guys in my next video.